June 1944. A Sherman crouched behind a hedgerow near Saint-Lô, its hull vibrating under German fire. Inside the turret, 5 men moved by reflex. Orders, recoil. Smoke, heat. Private Larkin, the loader, hauled another 40-pound round from the rack, his gloves slick with sweat. A shout cut through the noise. Up! But his wrist slipped, the shell tilting in midair. Instinct replaced training. He flipped the round underhand, guiding its base with his thumb instead of his palm, and drove it into the breech. The gunner fired. A Panzer vanished in dust and concussion. In that second, Larkin had broken a rule printed in every manual since 1942. Never cross the breech line with the hand reversed. The motion was faster but dangerous. A mistimed recoil could shatter bone, yet it worked. The next loader copied it, then another. By evening, crews across the hedgerows were timing their reloads with stopwatches and grinning at the results, 40% faster than regulation drills. Before dawn, the forbidden grip had a name whispered over tank radios and mess tables. It spread without orders, without approval, carried only by muscle and memory. A single defiant motion, born in fatigue and fear, was about to change how American armor fought and how quickly it killed. From the outside, the Sherman's gun looked precise, steel recoiling, smoke drifting, the turret steady. Inside, it was chaos controlled by routine. The loader's world measured barely 2 feet across. His shoulder jammed against the breech guard, his knees pressed against shell racks. Each 75 mm round weighed almost 40 pounds. At 6 shots per minute, he lifted more than a ton every 10 minutes inside a furnace of fumes and flame. The procedure was fixed. Pull from the ready rack, rotate the shell, base first, slam it home, shout, up. Manuals like TM 9731A warned never to twist the wrist under the breech. Hot gas and recoil could crush or burn. It was doctrine, safety before speed. But doctrine blurred fast in France. In the hedgerow maze of Normandy, German guns waited unseen beyond every bend. Seconds between shots decided whether a crew lived long enough to fire again. After the landings, the gap between design and experience widened. Ready racks were low, forcing a crouch and twist for every round. Long fights drained muscle, and the perfect motions drilled at Fort Knox collapsed into improvisation. Fatigue bred innovation. Loaders stopped thinking about procedure and began chasing survival, shaving fragments of time from every cycle. Reports from July 1944 confirmed it. Theoretical fire rates promised in training, 10 rounds per minute, rarely appeared. Frontline crews averaged 5 or 6. Engineers blamed heat and vibration. But inside the tanks, men searched for leverage, not excuses. Some shortened stances, some steadied shells on forearms, and one loader discovered that reversing the grip, palm upward, wrist straight, made the motion faster and steadier. He broke the rule and found a rhythm. The technique was risky. The breech slammed inches from his hand, yet the benefit was obvious. Instead of 3 small motions, lift, turn, align, everything became one continuous arc. The shell rode the arm. Guided by muscle memory rather than sight. The breech accepted it cleanly. The gunner fired again. Before the German could re-aim, the crew hardly noticed what had changed, only that the tank suddenly felt quicker. Alive. The act spread the way all field inventions did, through imitation. Next crew overwatched, tried, timed, and kept it. No form, no order, just observation. The change lived in wrists and shoulders, not paperwork. By late July, stopwatch tests inside several Sherman companies showed impossible numbers, 8, even 9 rounds per minute. Officers called it exceptional efficiency. The loaders called it something else. Freedom from the manual. No one could say who first flipped the shell, but every gunner remembered when the rhythm changed. Fire, reload, fire again, faster, smoother, confident. For the first time, the M4 felt like a weapon that answered instinct, not instruction. As summer turned to August, the habit hardened into culture. It had no inventor, no diagram, no name. It was born in exhaustion, passed by mimicry, measured by survival. By the time headquarters noticed the rising rates of ammunition use, it was too late to correct. The forbidden grip had escaped the rulebook and entered the bloodstream of the armored force. What began as a tired man's reflex was now an invisible doctrine, written not in ink, but in speed. By mid-1944, the Sherman dominated the roads of France, but inside its turret, time still ruled the fight. Every second between firing and reload decided whether the next hit came from them or at them. The loader's task looked simple on film, but brutal in practice. Reach low, lift a 38-pound shell, twist it base first, align, seat, and clear the breech before the recoil slammed home. The motion, repeated 1,000 times, turned muscle into calculation. Manuals described it as rhythm. In truth, it was survival mathematics. The loader's space was a steel coffin of edges and echoes. The breech recoiled inches from his chest, oil mist burned the lungs, and metal floor plates shuddered under every discharge. The Army called it one of the most strenuous positions in armored warfare. By the 5th or 6th shot, wrists trembled, grip weakened, and every round took longer. Heat made the brass slick. Vibration robbed precision. Doctrine demanded consistency. Combat demanded shortcuts. In training films from 1943, loaders stood tall and calm, feeding shells as if on a parade ground. In France, reality folded them double. Shells stuck against the breech collar, gloves caught on rims. Fatigue turned discipline into instinct. Loaders began modifying the routine quietly, trying anything that saved motion. Resting the shell along the forearm, turning the wrist differently, bracing a knee under the gun to keep balance. These weren't inventions, just small, desperate efficiencies. Among them was the grip that would change the war. The forbidden method began as an accident. One loader, pressed for time, reached underhand, palm up, guiding the shell like a weight along his forearm. It slid perfectly into the breech. The line officer thought it luck. Then he timed it. The same loader repeated 10 rounds, each cycle nearly a second faster than regulation. In mechanical terms, it was geometry. The arm stayed straight, using shoulder power instead of wrist twist, shortening the motion path by nearly 2 feet. It required no new parts, no extra strength, just nerve. Within days, other crews copied it. The test spread like a rumor. Motor pool contests became impromptu laboratories. Who could load faster without dropping the casing? The results were undeniable. From 6 rounds per minute, rates climbed to 8 or 9. The advantage was not academic. A tank duel often lasted less than a minute. Those 2 extra shots meant the Sherman's second correction arrived before a German could reload. In close hedgerow ranges, that second shot ended the duel. Officially, the act violated every safety rule. TM 9731A warned, loader will not insert round with wrist or forearm under breech guard. The penalty for error was severe. A mistimed feed could crush fingers or break bone. But combat blurred the line between risk and reward. As one crewman later said, the first time you win with it, you stop worrying about the manual. Behind the front, tanks parked in orchards became classrooms. Loaders stripped down to undershirts, practicing with dummy shells while gunners watched, timing every motion. They experimented with glove seams, adjusting grip texture. Some wrapped forearms in canvas for extra slide. The change needed no officer, no toolkit, no doctrine. It required only observation and repetition. That made it unstoppable. Resistance came from instructors worried about accidents, but statistics favored the loaders. No spike in injuries appeared in field reports. Instead, units showed fewer jams, smoother firing rhythms, and higher morale. Tankers began to treat loading speed as a badge of pride. Platoons competed for stopwatch records. Fastest gun in the company replaced marksmanship scores as the informal boast. The forbidden grip had changed the hierarchy inside the turret. For the first time, the loader's efficiency rivaled the gunner's accuracy. Crews felt faster, sharper, closer to the machine. The Sherman's reputation as reliable but slow began to fade. German prisoners described duels where American tanks fired before the echo of their last shot. By August, the method was everywhere, sometimes half-learned, sometimes perfected. In hedgerow ambushes near Avranches and Mortain, gunnery observers logged Shermans maintaining near-continuous fire for 60 seconds without visible fatigue. The figures reached headquarters, but were dismissed as exaggeration. No one suspected a human-driven improvement hiding behind the data. Inside the turrets, men didn't call it innovation. They called it common sense. The loader's underhand motion had erased wasted energy, allowing the tank's gun to behave as if it were self-loading. Yet no engineer had drawn it, no officer had ordered it, and no factory had built it. It was war's most efficient upgrade, born from exhaustion, spread through imitation, and recorded only in muscle memory. That was how the forbidden grip crossed from one man's reflex to an entire army's reflex. By the time the brass realized something had changed, the proof was everywhere, in faster engagements, heavier ammo usage, and enemy tanks burning before they could fire twice. Inside a steel box built by engineers, soldiers had found a way to make it think faster, and they had done it with nothing more than their hands. The rumor started small, just one loader bragging in a maintenance yard near Argenton that his crew could fire 9 rounds in a minute. The claim drew laughter until a stopwatch proved him right. Within a week, the talk spread across the 2nd Armored Division. Every motor pool turned into a proving ground. Crews climbed into Shermans lined with dummy shells and timed their cycles under the curious gaze of mechanics. Each trial ended the same way. The loaders who used the underhand motion always won. No one called it invention. They called it imitation. Manuals still forbade it, yet every loader watching another crew's rhythm learned it instinctively. There was no lesson, no speech, just the silent choreography of men copying what worked. It became a contest of motion, where efficiency outshone orders. Field notebooks from late August 1944 recorded reload times down to 6 seconds, nearly 40% faster than the official drill standard. On paper, it was a few seconds gained. In battle, it was the difference between a tank surviving or burning. In a tank duel, rhythm killed more often than aim. The Panzer IV, though armed with a superior gun, had a cramped turret and vertical shell stowage. German loaders twisted sideways to reach their ammunition, losing seconds each cycle. The Sherman's low horizontal racks, once criticized for inefficiency, became a hidden advantage under the new motion. The shell slid upward in one fluid arc, guided by the loader's forearm, its own weight carrying it home. The underhand grip had turned a mechanical liability into a tactical edge. Reports from field gunnery sections soon showed unusual results. Shermans were now matching or exceeding theoretical rates of fire. Officers, assuming improved discipline, praised the units for superior drill cohesion. None realized the change came from disobedience. In an August after-action note from the 3rd Armored Division, one commander wrote, "Crew response time exceptional. Loaders appear pre-synchronized with gunners. The cause wasn't training, it was instinct elevated to muscle memory." Speed had its cost. The motion brought the loader's forearm dangerously close to the breech recoil. Minor burns and bruises multiplied, but the loaders ignored them. They wrapped wrists in torn sleeves, greased glove seams for glide, and taped fingers against vibration. They accepted the pain because the trade was fair. Faster load, shorter duel, longer life. A wrist bruise was better than a funeral detail. The method spread faster than any order could travel. Newly arrived replacement crews from England were shocked by the pace of veteran tankers. They had practiced the old technique for months and couldn't match the tempo. Soon they were taken aside, shown once, and told quietly, "If you want to live, load this way." There was no paperwork, only demonstration. By September, even training depots behind the line had adopted economy drills inspired by frontline habits, though no manual dared to name the technique. The results reshaped combat rhythm. Gunners stopped waiting for the loader's call. "Up" came almost instantly after recoil. The tank commander shortened his cadence of orders. The driver braced for quicker follow-up shots. In minutes of chaos, the entire crew moved as a single mechanism, each anticipating the next man's motion. The Sherman, once dismissed as outclassed by German armor, now dictated the tempo of engagement. In one action near Mortain, a Sherman platoon was ambushed by Stug, the 3rd Assault Guns, hidden in an orchard. The 1st American tank took a hit to the glacis, but returned fire twice in 14 seconds. The 2nd round struck the German vehicle square in the mantlet, disabling it before its gunner reloaded. An observer timing the fight noted reload speed beyond manual limits. The secret sat inside the loader's cramped station, one reversed grip, repeated without thought. Morale followed results. Tankers began comparing reload times like pilots compared kills, crews scrawled chalk notes on turret sides, 8 in 60, their unofficial trophy. Within weeks, every battalion had its own champions, loaders whose names passed between companies like folklore. No officer encouraged it, but none stopped it. The Army's hierarchy had quietly inverted. Technique flowed upward from the men who fought, not downward from those who wrote the manuals. To the loaders, it never felt like rebellion. It was simply the natural evolution of survival. A tank that could shoot faster was a tank that came home. They didn't quote doctrine, they counted seconds. The forbidden grip, whispered first in fear, had become a quiet badge of mastery, proof that experience, not theory, ruled the war inside the turret. By early September, the transformation was irreversible. Every veteran crew had learned it, every new loader copied it, and every engagement proved its worth. There was no longer right or wrong technique, only fast or dead. The forbidden grip was no longer a secret. It was the new law of speed. The first timed experiment came from a forward ordnance team near Isigny. They gathered 3 crews and tested every loading motion in isolation, palm down, half twist, underhand. A sergeant with a stopwatch logged each result in silence. The figures spoke for themselves. The underhand grip cut nearly a full second per round with fewer misalignments. His notebook recorded it as loader economy, remarkable. He left the field line blank for method, unwilling to admit what he had just proven. Urban warfare confirmed the lesson. In Aachen's stone alleys, range collapsed and duels turned frantic. Panzerfausts flashed from windows, and loaders had seconds to prepare a response. Crews using the forbidden grip fired twice before enemy gunners corrected aim. The motion matched the pace of city fighting, fluid, instinctive, ruthless. In close combat, speed meant less exposure. The loader's forearm became the hinge on which whole streets pivoted. Rhythm changed language. Inside the tank, voices shortened. Up became a reflex more than a command. Commanders stopped calling corrections. The next shot was already chambered. Over intercoms, the Sherman sounded mechanical. Fire, reload, fire again. Outside, to German observers, it felt like facing an automatic cannon. What no one saw was the human engine powering it, 5 men, each in sync with the loader's pulse. By autumn 1944, the new rhythm reached training grounds in England. Instructors, unable to ignore the reports, introduced efficiency drills. They stripped the wording of rebellion, calling it natural loading posture. Cadets practiced in cramped mock turrets under dim light until motion replaced thought. The rule stayed unspoken. Never cross the breech line palm up, except everyone did. The Allies noticed, so did the enemy. German intelligence summaries began describing American tanks firing unnaturally fast in sequence. They believed new mechanical aids or autoloaders had been introduced. None imagined it was muscle, not machinery, that had changed the math. The Wehrmacht's field orders even warned crews to relocate after the first shot. U.S. armor returns fire with extreme rapidity. The adaptation had rewritten tactics across both sides of the line. The method also crossed oceans. British Firefly crews, curious after hearing American claims, tested the motion with their longer 17-pounder rounds. The heavier ammunition punished errors. An overreach could sprain a wrist, but some managed partial success. Canadian loaders on Sherman IC hybrids refined it further, using cloth sleeves to reduce friction. Across the Allied front, men converged on the same principle: shorten motion, trust feel. Night operations proved its final worth. Under flare light or tracer glow, eyes deceived, but the hand knew the way. The casing slid along the forearm until metal kissed metal. Loaders could now work blind, guided by vibration and weight alone. In the dark, the forbidden grip became the only motion that still worked perfectly. Gunners called it the feel load. It was speed by touch. Command logs showed side effects almost immediately. Ammunition trucks struggled to keep pace. Units reported consuming 30% more rounds per day than projected. Mechanics logged heavier breech wear, polished steel shining where sleeves brushed too often. But commanders didn't complain. Engagement durations dropped. Tank losses fell. Efficiency justified risk. Even bureaucracy began to shift tone. Field manuals updated phrasing from "maintain safe clearance from breech recoil" to ensure controlled alignment. It was a careful compromise, rules rewritten to match reality. The Army hadn't endorsed rebellion. It had legalized it. The loader's motion had forced policy to evolve, word by word. Among the men, pride turned myth. Crews chalked curved marks under their gun barrels, a subtle emblem of the grip's arc. It meant survival, not superstition. They taught new replacements by showing, not speaking. One veteran from the 4th Armored later said, "It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about keeping each other alive long enough to break them again tomorrow." German tactics adapted again, too late. Stug ambush teams began firing smoke immediately after first contact to obscure Sherman return fire. But the Americans fired twice before the haze thickened. The new tempo had become predictable only to those who created it. A Panther's reload took 8 seconds, a Sherman's 6. Those 2 seconds became the margin of victory in duels measured in yards. Winter brought refinement, not change. Loaders rotated through tanks, teaching the technique informally across units. The motion lost its nickname, surviving as habit. When questioned by officers, few could explain it. It wasn't rebellion anymore, it was instinct. As one report noted dryly, all experienced crews demonstrate similar efficiency, method indeterminate. The secret had dissolved into normalcy. By early 1945, the forbidden grip no longer belonged to a man or a company, it belonged to an army. No blueprint recorded it, no factory designed it, yet it had reshaped the performance of thousands of tanks from Normandy to the Rhine. The act that began as defiance under fire had become standard practice under silence, and when the front finally stopped moving and the Shermans cooled in their revetments, the loaders flexed their wrists and smiled at the bruises. The war had taught them what no manual ever would, that sometimes the fastest weapon in the world was the human body learning to outthink its own limits. By early 1945, the forbidden grip was no longer rumor. It was reflex. New crews stepping off transport at Le Havre climbed into Shermans already trained by veterans who spoke little and demonstrated everything. The lesson took 5 seconds. One arm under, thumb guiding the rim, elbow locked, wrist straight. No diagrams, no permission. Just repetition until it became muscle and memory. Instructors called it efficiency, but every man knew what it really was, defiance turned doctrine. Reports from the front confirmed what stopwatches had whispered for months. Crews were sustaining 8 to 9 rounds per minute, nearly 40% faster than the manual's design speed. Ordnance officers at Aberdeen and Wiltshire tried to verify the impossible. Same tanks, same guns, same ammunition. Yet the numbers held. The engineers filmed slow-motion sequences of loaders at work and realized the truth. The improvement wasn't mechanical. It was human geometry. The arm stayed aligned, the wrist unbent, the motion a single arc instead of 3 small turns. The loader's body had evolved into a faster machine than the Sherman itself. Army bureaucracy handled the revelation the only way it could, by rewriting without admitting. Revised field circulars in spring 1945 introduced phrases like natural motion and maintain fluid sequence. Nowhere did they mention direction. It was official silence wearing the mask of approval. The front had already moved on. In the closing months of the war, this new rhythm reshaped battles. In the shattered streets of Cologne, a 3rd Armored Division Sherman faced 2 Panthers across the bridgehead. The first American shell ricocheted. The second, fed underhand, struck before the German gunner could reload. The entire duel lasted 14 seconds. Photographs taken moments later show the loader's gloved hand still near the breech, smoke curling upward. He would later say he didn't think, only moved. The gun and I were one thing. Inspectors studying returning tanks noticed another pattern. Breech collars and lugs on veteran Shermans showed smoother wear than those on training vehicles. The constant straight-line feed of the underhand motion reduced micro-friction, meaning fewer jams and longer service life. A field habit had accidentally solved a design flaw. Aberdeen's test division quietly filed a note. Improvement appears due to field efficiency of motion. Retain practice if safe. That was as close as the Army came to recognition. The method's reach extended across oceans. British and Canadian crews, initially skeptical, began experimenting with their own variants. Firefly loaders modified the angle slightly to accommodate the 17-pounder's greater length. Some wrapped their forearms in cloth for friction, others used chalk for grip. Reports from Canadian armored units noted significant reduction in loader fatigue and faster first-shot correction. The movement had crossed national lines without ever crossing a desk. As 1945 advanced, ordnance films captured the practice on camera. At the Aberdeen Proving Ground, engineers used chalk marks on sleeves and breeches to analyze limb trajectories. The frames confirmed what instinct had already taught men in Normandy. The underhand feed was biomechanically sound. It used large muscle groups, shoulder, back, bicep, rather than small forearm rotations, prone to failure. Ironically, the forbidden technique was safer when done properly than the one officially sanctioned for 2 years. By now, the grip was so common that its origin blurred. Loaders trained by veterans assumed it had always existed. Manuals still showed the outdated palm-down stance, but no one followed it. Even in replacement depots, the old motion vanished from drills. It was absorbed by time, erased by practice. The loader's hands, not headquarters, had written the new regulation. German crews noticed the change the hard way. Reports from the Western Front described American tanks firing continuously without visible pause. Believing they faced new autoloaders, German intelligence circulated warnings urging units to relocate immediately after the first exchange. The Panther's 8-second reload was now a liability. The war of machines had turned into a contest of human tempo, and the Americans had found their rhythm. The technique also shaped culture within the armored ranks. Crews began marking curved chalk lines beneath their gun barrels, a quiet emblem of the loader's arc. It wasn't decoration. It was belonging. Tankers knew each other by that sign, a symbol of shared fatigue, shared speed, and the unwritten law that experience outranked instruction. Speed competitions became common. At bivouacs, loaders timed each other using spent casings filled with sand. The best could feed 10 rounds in 60 seconds with perfect cadence. There were no medals for it, but everyone knew their names. In a war of factories and statistics, it was a rare reminder that muscle still mattered. As victory neared, ordnance officers prepared post-war documentation. They never mentioned the forbidden grip by name, but used its data to revise crew efficiency standards. The new gunnery manuals published in 1946 at Fort Knox described low-angle feed as the preferred motion. The drawing, loader bent low, arm straight, shell guided from beneath, was unmistakable. Rebellion had been quietly canonized. Even after the war, its imprint endured. The M26. Pershing and M46 Patton inherited the same turret ergonomics, designed around the loader's improved arc. Engineers studied wartime film to refine breech alignment, unknowingly enshrining a field trick into industrial design. The forbidden grip had changed not just how men loaded shells, but how tanks were built for decades. Historians later tried to name its inventor, but no record existed. Every unit had its own story. Some said it started in Normandy, others in Italy. A few swore it came from a single sergeant who improvised after an injury. None could prove it. The truth was simpler. It belonged to everyone who tried to stay alive one more minute under fire. By the 1950s, the gesture was universal. Training films no longer warned about wrist angle. Manuals called it the standard feed. The word forbidden vanished from memory, replaced by a simple phrase, smooth and natural motion. What began as instinct had evolved into orthodoxy. The final irony sat in an ordnance archive in a 1944 report that once described abnormal firing speed, cause unverified. The Army had found its answer, but not in theory, only in men. The forbidden grip never needed credit. Its reward was survival. Every time a shell slammed into a breach afterward, in Korea, in Vietnam, in the hands of new generations, it carried the ghost of that first loader behind the hedgerows of France. His motion, unrecorded but unforgettable, had turned fatigue into discovery, rebellion into method, and human instinct into military engineering. When the guns fell silent, rows of Shermans cooled in German yards, their breeches clean, their turrets locked. Mechanics logged serials and drained oil. Clerks counted tonnage and fuel. For the men who had lived inside, the truest ledger was rhythm, not steel. They remembered the moment the cycle shortened, the hand sliding under, the shell riding bone, the breach closing like a door. A change without orders had redrawn the math of their survival. In 1946, training films at Fort Knox quietly mirrored the field. The narrator spoke of economy of motion, his tone dry and careful. On screen, the loader bent low, forearm guiding the round, wrist straight, palm upward. No one said rule or rebellion. Yet veterans recognized their own motion, stripped of its danger and shown as if it had always belonged. Bureaucracy absorbed the habit by renaming it. The image did the rest. Former loaders, now instructors, taught by demonstration. They stood behind trainees, hands hovering for a rescue that rarely came, and let repetition do the work. The story of hedgerows and orchards faded in classrooms, replaced by timings and form. Students learned a motion unmoored from its origin. That was enough. The technique had never needed a name or an author. It required only bodies willing to learn speed the way soldiers always had, by doing. Armor journals in the early 50s tried to quantify the gain. Articles spoke of loader cycle optimization, reduced fatigue, and cleaner feeds. They cited fewer jams, steadier follow-up shots, and short engagements that saved fuel and crews. The prose was bloodless, but the numbers traced a human outline. Somewhere beneath those tables was a tired man in France who had trusted touch over text and given his army a faster second shot. Across the Atlantic, British analysts drew similar conclusions. Reports credited American loaders with remarkable efficiency of motion, a phrase that sounded clinical until one imagined the heat, smoke, and recoil that produced it. They did not know that the efficiency had no author beyond necessity. It had traveled by imitation, crossing mess lines and language, surviving because it demanded nothing from factories and everything from hands. Oral history later carried the detail that documents missed. Veterans recalled the same unteachable instant when nerves and training parted, and instinct finished the cycle. They remembered the weight against the forearm, the hiss of gas, the click of lugs. Most could not say who showed them first. The gesture felt discovered rather than invented, as if the turret had taught it. One man said, "The tank already knew, we caught up." That idea, machines teaching men by pressure and risk, fit the larger story of industrial war. The loader's grip belonged with other field solutions that turned improvisation into doctrine. Sandbag armor stacked by crews, feed belt tricks that steadied B-17 guns, knee bracing taught on destroyer decks. None arrived from blueprints. All survived because they worked under fire and required no permission beyond proof. Doctrine followed where evidence had already walked. When the Sherman aged out of service, the motion remained. Pershings and Pattons inherited turrets shaped by the same arc. Engineers tweaked breech collars and hand clearances with an eye to natural feed, not knowing they were encoding a battlefield habit into metal. Manuals lost the word forbidden. Slides labeled the stance low angle, the phrase neutral and durable. The technique's origin slipped into silence, but its utility did not. In an ordnance archive, a faint pencil note beside a timing table still reads, "Improvement unaccounted for, likely human factor." It is the closest the record comes to credit. The loaders never asked for more. They counted victories in seconds shaved and friends who came home. If you climb into a restored Sherman today and look at the breech, you can imagine the ghost of that arc, lift, guide, feed, fire, and understand how a small defiance became the quiet law of speed. Night over Normandy. The smoke had cleared, but the air still hummed with heat. Inside a Sherman resting beside the hedgerows, a loader flexed his bruised wrist, staring at the scarred breech that had nearly crushed it. Around him, empty casings glowed faintly in the dark. He hadn't set out to change anything. He'd only wanted the next round ready before the enemy's second shot. In time, no one remembered his name, only the motion. It spread faster than rumor, rewriting a manual through repetition. Each loader who copied it added another link to an invisible chain stretching from one night's mistake to an army's habit. The rule that once forbade it vanished under the weight of success. Years later, the manuals would call it natural feed, as if it had always existed. The men who discovered it never argued. They had lived the truth that bureaucracy learned too late that war was a machine run by human instinct. In the stillness, the loader's hands rested on steel that would outlast him. He hadn't invented anything. He had merely found a faster way to survive. Yet, in that small defiance, he had given an army time, 1 second at a time, to live.